Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar today is entitled Myth Busting, Truths About SLD and Wisconsin's SLD Program. Today, our presenter is Deb Hess. Deb is joining us today from the Department of Public Instruction, where she is a consultant for the specific learning disabilities. Deb has been actively involved in the field of learning disabilities for her entire professional career. Initially, Deb was a teacher of students with SLD. Then Deb was a university faculty member and helped to prepare future special educators for their challenging roles. These experiences provide a foundation for Deb's work at the Department of Public Instruction. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Deb. Deb Hess?
Hi, but that's close, Bonnie, so thank you. I'm so delighted to be with everybody here, and so thanks for taking time out of your busy lives to be present at this webinar and maybe to do some future sharing. I love supporting the work of Wisconsin Facets, and one of the reasons I love it so much is because it provides me a broader base of contact with individuals who are out in the field. So thanks very much for joining us. My journey, Bonnie shared some details, but part of the rationale for today, as I was thinking about the topic, when Facets approached me to do this webinar, is that in January I will be beginning my third year at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction in my current role. And it has been 3 full years, 3 years since the SLD rule in Wisconsin was first implemented. So, everyone has worked very hard on that, and thinking about moving forward in the future, one of the things that I considered are some of the ideas that are out in the field that I hear from parents and teachers all the time that are sources of confusion, or what I'm going to call for today, myths. And certainly some of these ideas have been around for quite some time. It was in 1963, you may know that Dr. Samuel Kirk first used the term learning disability. So that's in the field of disabilities, that's a relatively kind of short lifetime, but it's given some time for us to establish a field within special education. So one of the first things that I looked at in terms of some of the myths, I looked at this understood.org website, which is a really fine site for challenges in learning and attention. And I'll just take a side detour to say that all of the links that are embedded within this PowerPoint will take you directly to the site. So if you want to follow up later with additional information, or if you want to look at some of the original documents that are referenced in this PowerPoint, you can do so. So Understood compiled some information about students who experience learning disabilities. And I just pulled out a couple ideas to get us thinking about some of the myths or some of the challenges. One of the notions is up to 1/3 of parents of students with learning disabilities don't feel prepared to take on the challenge. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a myth. I'm calling that out because I think it's important for us to remember. I don't think it's at all unusual that parents of any children who experience disabilities would feel that they weren't prepared. Most of us don't do this kind of preparation for parenthood, but it's something that's really important for us to remember and to think about as we do consider myths. Because in contrast to what parents are feeling, the general public, and this is based on a 2010 survey that the National Council on Learning Disabilities completed, the general public is aware of learning disabilities, but still has some incorrect ideas. So for instance, one incorrect idea is that learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities are the same condition. That certainly is not true. I also think because learning disabilities tend to be what is sometimes called a hidden disability, a disability that is not so easy to necessarily see at first glance, that contributes to people having some incorrect ideas. Finally, this notion that kids with learning disabilities have more trouble in school and out of school than other kids do is included because I think that this really busts the idea that students with learning disabilities might not have challenges outside of school. We have learned since the 1960s that really learning disabilities can have a pervasive impact on students' lives and indeed can affect an individual throughout their lifespan. So it's really important to think that it's not just something that happens at school, it can affect a student's entire life. And that leads me to considering Agenda 2017. You may have seen things about Agenda 2017 because this really is Dr. Evers' plan for considering the future of education in Wisconsin. And one of these is that all Wisconsin graduates, so that includes students who experience disabilities, all Wisconsin graduates are college and career ready. And what I love about this is something that considers what we were just talking about, that students graduate from high school not only academically prepared, but socially and emotionally competent. So this has to do with in-school learning, book learning, if you will, with academic preparation, but also relationships and outside of school experiences in terms of social emotional competencies. So that's something that we think a lot about in special education, but it's certainly true in all of education. And this college and career readiness considers knowledge, again, the academic content, skills, so critical thinking, collaborating with others, communicating are included. Also habits such as perseverance, adaptability, leadership, and those habits and some of the skills really focus on more functional sorts of things, ideas that go beyond the school day. This is something, the idea of college and career readiness is something that everybody at DPI is really focusing their efforts on and attention on. And this is certainly true of the special education team. We have developed some enhanced IEP forms that different districts will be rolling out during the next year. So, you know, as you go to the next IEP meeting, you may be learning about these new forms, which we think really focus the IEP team's efforts on college and career readiness. So with that as background, here are some of the topics that I'd like us to focus on today. And these are all topics that I selected based on information and questions that I hear from families and schools, either through phone calls here to the department or times that I'm out in the field. And you'll note that I've also included some time for question and answers at the end. I really would like to have an opportunity for you to bring up topics of interest and concern to you while we have this time together today. So as Bonnie indicated, if you would type in your questions as we're going along, I'll pause at the end of each of these topics, but also I will reserve some time at the end for your questions. So do we have any questions so far, Bonnie?
No, none so far. Oh, just one just came up. Hang on one second. We have been unable, I guess they're saying that they've had some trouble printing the handouts. So I will make sure that they will get copies of that and we'll send it in a different format.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So I'd like to talk first a little bit about dyslexia because this is an area of some confusion and understandably so. So this slide shows the definition of specific learning disability that's included in the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as our state PI 11. So this is state and federal. And it really is a definition that hasn't changed since IDA was first implemented in 1975. And the italics that are included here are italics that I added. So I added them obviously to highlight them, bring them to your attention. This definition tells what specific learning disability is, a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes, and then it includes this statement in italics that says, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. So dyslexia is included as an example of a condition that could be considered a specific learning disability in this definition. And I think that causes a lot of individuals to understand that if a child is identified as having dyslexia, then they automatically qualify for special education services in the public schools as a result of that. And this really has been a national conversation. And I think it's a national conversation that isn't really slowing down. So it's worth talking about a little bit. There was, in fact, attention given to this topic by a letter from the Office of Special Education Programs just about a year ago in October 2015. And that guidance, which is discussed in this document, Dyslexia and Specific Learning Disabilities on the Wisconsin DPI website, reminded us of a couple of things. One is that the use of the term dyslexia is not prohibited. Now, that sounds like kind of an odd way to say it, but I think what was happening was parents and other people outside the schools were going to schools and having questions about dyslexia, and schools were saying, well, we don't teach students who have dyslexia, or we don't evaluate students who have dyslexia, kind of like we don't talk about dyslexia. And what this guidance specifically says is that the IEP teams may include information from outside evaluations in their reports. And as the IEP team is doing its work, they can certainly include the term dyslexia or dysgraphia, dyscalculia directly in the document. So for those of us in the schools, you know, it's a matter of talking with parents further if they bring up the term dyslexia and say, you know, my child was identified as having dyslexia from an outside evaluation, and finding out what the next steps might be. And that next step might be a referral for a special education evaluation. For parents, it certainly is a reminder that you do want to talk with school personnel, and including the IEP team, if your child is identified as having dyslexia. Now, the part where it's, I think, a little bit confusing sometimes is that dyslexia is a term that is used in outside evaluations, and by that I mean schools that are conducted outside a public school setting. And so the IEP team in the public school must still decide if the student meets the criteria for specific learning disabilities eligibility in Wisconsin. And that means the student would need to meet the 3 criteria of inadequate classroom achievement, insufficient progress in response to scientific research-based interventions, and for there to be no exclusionary factors. So that's a long way of saying that simply because a student is identified as having dyslexia as part of an evaluation outside of the school does not mean that the student automatically qualifies for special education services. The student would still need to meet criteria for SLD eligibility in Wisconsin public schools. So how's that? Any questions about that?
Not at this time.
Okay, good. So as you're thinking about this as we go along, please feel free to type them in the box, and we can go ahead and discuss those. So the next topic I wanted to talk about with you, and is kind of the source of some falsely held ideas, and also a topic of Office of Special Education Programs memo, is response to intervention and how that works with special education services. So I think I'm going to go ahead, let's go to the next one, and I'll come back to this one. So in Wisconsin, all districts have to now implement the SLD rule, the 3 criteria for SLD eligibility. Now, what's a little bit different is that a fully implemented response to intervention system is not required by the rule. And in fact, in Wisconsin, a response to intervention system or a multi-level system of support is not required either. That's an individual school district decision. So the myth here is some people will say that the SLD rule is the RTI rule, or that the SLD rule requires an RTI system or a multi-level system of support. That's not true. The SLD rule defines how special education eligibility for SLD is determined, but it doesn't say that a multi-level system of support is required. However, and here's the dicey part, if a school does have a fully implemented multi-level system of support, they will likely find it easier to implement the SLD rule. And here's why. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide. And this is a continuum of services. Imagine that this fat arrow in the middle is the multi-level system of support. And that multi-level system of support is going to go all the way from core instruction or universal instruction, the high quality instruction that all students receive, all the way to interventions which are consistent with the SLD rule. So this is really a wide range of instruction and intervention that's in here. It's only when a student is at the most specific levels, the highest levels, the most intense levels, that and perhaps referral for SLD is being considered, that the interventions need to be consistent with the SLD rule. Otherwise, there's a great deal of flexibility that's included in here. But if a school already has a multi-level system of support in this way, if they already are implementing this continuum of services, it may well be much easier for them to move forward and implement the SLD rule. So again, the SLD rule does not require this continuum, but if this continuum, if a multi-level system of supports is available in a school district, it might be easier to implement. Sometimes, because of the need to implement two scientific research-based interventions, there might need to be an extension in the timeline. So this relates to the multi-level system of support in that sometimes when a student is referred for a special education evaluation, those two interventions have not yet been completed. This diagram shows typical evaluation timelines. And what these typical evaluation timelines require is that there are up to 60 days that pass between the time when a parent consents for evaluation and the IEP team meets to determine eligibility. And there's lots of reasons for that 60-day timeline. But if a student is referred for eligibility for special education, for specific learning disabilities in this instance, and has not had two intensive scientific research-based interventions completed, then that is one of only 3 exceptions to this timeline in our state. So if this timeline extension is specific to initial SLD evaluations, so this is the first time that a child is being referred for special education, and it could be the first time even if they might be identified as having another disability, but it's the first time that they're being evaluated for SLD eligibility. And this extension is specific to the need to allow for the collection of necessary data when the student hasn't received those 2 intensive interventions when they're referred. And now, this is something that I think is really critical to understand, because there are a lot of myths around this, and I think it's really important that school personnel very carefully explain this to parents so that they understand what's coming forward in the future. One thing is that this extension can only happen by written agreement of the IEP team, including the parent. In other words, the parent needs to sign written permission for this. There has been a sample form developed, and it's up on the DPI site if school districts wish to use that. The M3 form that includes the information that would be needed. It's important that the agreement would include a date when the evaluation would be completed. I think that's really critical so that parents know what they're consenting to. They know how much longer this is going to take. So, of course, school personnel are going to need to look at what is required to implement those interventions. If the student is being considered for other impairments in addition to specific learning disabilities, so for instance, if the child is being considered for SLD and speech and language, or SLD and other health impaired, the extension extends to the entire evaluation, not just to the SLD part. The other component about this is what happens, if a parent does not give permission. So, and this is a question that parents ask me a lot of times. So if the school district asks for an extension specific to the purposes of collecting these intervention data, the parent can certainly decide no, that consent is going to be withheld. If that happens, the IEP team is going to need to meet during the original timeline and make a decision about those SLD eligibility criteria. It may be that the IEP team will find that there's not enough data to determine that the child can be identified with SLD, but the decision is always the parent. So that's kind of a dicey area, a hard to understand area. Any questions?
There are no questions at this time, Deb.
All right. I just want to make sure we have lots of good opportunities for questions. So the next thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about in terms of myths and areas where there are a lot of questions is about interventions. Because in the SLD rule, as I said, there are those 3 criteria: inadequate classroom achievement, insufficient progress in response to a scientific, research, or evidence-based intervention, and lack of exclusionary factors. So this is the biggest one. This is the reason that you might need to have a timeline extension. This is the reason that you might be concerned about a multi-level system of support. So let's step back a little bit and talk about what is an intervention. Well, PI 11 defines an intervention in a straightforward manner by saying that an intervention is the systematic use of a technique, program, or practice designed to improve learning or performance in specific areas of pupil need. Within the context of the SLD rule, a scientific research-based intervention, or SRBI, as we sometimes say for short because it gets to be long to say, has to meet some specific standards. One specific standard is that the intervention needs to have a scientific research base, or it needs to be evidence-based. So the IEP team or the intervention team at the school needs to be selecting interventions that are based on some specific research. In other words, the notion here is that interventions are selected that have a known positive impact on learning of students who have characteristics that are similar to the student who is being referred. In other words, if you're looking at the eligibility of a child for specific learning disabilities, you want to make sure that you're using high quality instruction. You don't want to waste anybody's time for this part of the SLD eligibility criteria with an intervention that doesn't have a track record, that there isn't evidence that moving forward is going to be useful. So that's a big one. And one of the myths here is that DPI has some kind of a list that that districts can pick from in terms of what would be a good SRBI. That is not the case. The selection of SRBIs is a local school district decision, just like other curriculum in a school. So this is an area where teams really need to come together and look at the criteria that are included in the SLD rule and make some decisions about what's the best match for that student's needs. Within the context of the SLD rule, the SRBI also needs to be used with individual students or with small groups of students. So that relates to the intensity of the intervention. This isn't whole group instruction. The intervention is also focused on one discrete skills area or a small number of discrete skills that are closely related to that student's area of learning needs. And this relates to what the SLD rule calls the area of concern. So there are 8 of them. 3 of them are about reading, basic reading skills, reading comprehension, and reading fluency. 2 of them are about math calculations and math problem solving. Written expression is another one, and listening, comprehension, and oral expression. So those 8 areas are included in the federal definition of specific learning disabilities, and the IEP team decides, with input from the parents, of course, what are the areas of concern for that student. That would be done at the time of existing data to decide what that match is. So it's really important that the intervention that's selected matches not only the demographic characteristics of the student's age, the student's background, and so on, as well as the student's area of learning need. So other criterion for a specific scientific research-based intervention are that the SRBI is culturally responsive, and that begins, of course, by selecting an intervention that has been used with students who have similar characteristics as the student who is being referred. But it also looks at other aspects of cultural responsiveness. And SRBI also provides a substantial number of instructional minutes beyond what is provided to all students. And the SLD rule is silent, really, on what is a substantial number of instructional minutes. But that's a way of thinking about this is instruction that goes beyond that core that all students receive. So it's an adequate chunk of time that's beyond that. These interventions have to be implemented with adequate fidelity, and that's a word that is, fidelity is defined within the context of the SLD rule in terms of time. So, for instance, the rule specifies that it would be at least 80% of the recommended number of weeks, sessions, or minutes. So here's where another myth or misconception comes in, because I hear from parents and schools, oh, well, you know, is it true that interventions only need to be implemented for 6 weeks? Can interventions only be implemented for 10 weeks? The fact of the matter is that interventions need to be completed in a manner that is consistent with the way they were designed and for a time period for which it's designed. So that means that the first place that needs to be consulted is any sort of publisher's manual or research studies that are done about that intervention that tell how long the intervention was implemented with other students. Then you're going to also look at the data that's collected for a specific student to make sure that you have a reliable trend line, that your line is going in one direction and it's not headed all over the place. So it really is a myth to say, oh, we always implement interventions for 6 weeks or 9 weeks. It really is dependent on what the designers of that intervention said, what research about the intervention said, and what data from that particular student's performance tell us. So interventions need to be implemented with adequate fidelity.
Deb, I do have a question at this time, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, the question is, what qualifications does an SLD teacher need to have to appropriately select an evidence-based practice from a menu of interventions?
That's a really good question. I would say that most of the time, interventions that are selected are done by the team, not just by the SLD teacher. In other words, in most school districts, this is a team decision when we're looking at interventions for the purpose of determining SLD eligibility. If it's something that the SLD teacher is implementing in her classroom, that would be a different sort of situation. In all instances, excuse me, in all instances, the primary qualification for intervention selection and intervention implementation has to do with licensure. So we do have some documents on the DPI site about who can implement interventions. It's more about who can implement them more than who can select them. But again, it goes back to licensure. So for instance, if it is a reading intervention that is being implemented, it is most often a reading teacher, somebody who holds a 316 license, who is going to be implementing that intervention. Or at the elementary level, it might be the elementary general education teacher, because those individuals are prepared and licensed to teach reading. If it's a math intervention, then it will be somebody with licensure in that area. So we really think about the licensure, about who can implement the interventions more than licensure for who can select interventions. Excuse me, I'm waiting for the frost to come so my allergies clear up.
I do have one other question if you're willing to take it at this time.
Sure.
Actually, I have two that just came up. The first one is, why isn't it a requirement in Wisconsin state law to screen K2 students for dyslexia?
Okay. Why isn't it a requirement? I think because right now there are other screening tests that are used for young students, for emerging readers in the state of Wisconsin. And some of those look at some early reading skills, phonemic awareness, and so forth, areas that some people might perceive would kind of overlap with considerations of dyslexia. So there is reading screening that's going on. There used to be a test from that was sort of, I don't want to say mandated, but I guess it was sort of a mandate. And I'm struggling a little bit here because that requirement was removed to the best of my knowledge last year, and school districts are allowed now to pick which reading tests they're going to use. So I can find out more about that. So when we get to the end of the presentation, you will see contact information for me, and if you want to send me an email, I will check on that specific requirement. But I think that the short answer is that there is reading screening that's going on for young learners in Wisconsin, and I think that that's the specific reason that it's felt that would identify those emerging readers who need support.
Okay, thank you. Now, would you like me to hold the other questions? I have two more at this time.
You could go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay. The next question was, how many 316 licensed reading teachers are there approximately in a district? Do you know that?
I think it just depends on the district. I think that more districts are trying to hire individuals who, have more than just the one license. So whether it's in general education or special education, I think districts are trying to obtain more of those teachers. But I don't know. I know that there's a requirement for at least one but I don't know how many. I think it's going to pretty much vary depending on the district.
Okay, and the last one that I have now is, would you know of any online courses which may be valid enough to work with students in special education or who have a special education?
Online courses?
Yes.
I don't. I don't know if this is in the context of interventions for students. There are some interventions that I think some schools would use, and I've seen some research about specific programs that can be good. I think it's a matter of looking for that specific information. But I don't offhand, off the top of my head, know of specific courses. So if you were looking for something that was more than an intervention, say a course that was about American history or algebra or something like that, I don't know. Again, I would say if you would like me to go further with that, my email will be at the end of the presentation, and you could either send me an email or call me, remind me of this webinar that was where we talked about it, and I will be happy to try and find out more information about that.
Okay, thank you.
I am really fortunate here at the department to work really closely with folks on the literacy and mathematics team. We just hired a new consultant, a new mathematics consultant, so I'm looking forward to working with her. And I get to work pretty closely with literacy consultants. But as you can see, I kind of rely on them to answer some of the licensure questions and things for literacy. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with me, and I will connect with them and get that information for you. And that, as we go back to this last slide about the interventions, I wanted to also mention that in the context of SLD eligibility considerations, it is not usually the special educator who is implementing the interventions, the scientific research-based interventions. That only happens in a very limited circumstances when the student already has an IEP and is being evaluated for specific learning disabilities for the first time. So it's a very narrow set of circumstances. And that is because, if you think about that big fat arrow again, the SRBIs, the scientific research-based interventions, really take place within the general education context. That when it's part of the eligibility determination, the student is not yet in special education. So the special educator is not going to be completing those SRBIs as part of the eligibility. The special educator certainly can implement interventions in other contexts, and after a student is placed, for example. But just so to clear up that confusion, it's a little bit different role for special educators. So this slide, in one quick slide, kind of shows you why that extension to the timeline, the IEP evaluation timeline, might be necessary. The SLD rule requires that there are 2 SRBIs. So in order to implement this, for each of the 2 SRBIs, the baseline is determined and a median score set using 3 probes. Then the intervention is implemented. Weekly or more frequent progress monitoring data is collected using probes. The data are analyzed, and then when that whole process happens for one intervention, then it's repeated for the second intervention. And again, these interventions, the SRBIs, are implemented for as long as it is necessary to do so with fidelity. So some resources that I wanted to point out to you. One is the specific learning disabilities page. Now, when Bonnie and I checked this out, they were all working. Oh, sure, Bonnie, now it's
Uh-oh. There you go. There you go.
I don't know why it's not opening. Let's try this one.
Oh,
all right,
thinking.
Good is working. This is the website that I referenced earlier. And as I said, this website is for learning and attention concerns. There's a lot of great information here. I think this is really pretty easy to navigate. And you can set up individual parameters as you work through this, but you can get all sorts of different information from, as you can see, social emotional, academic issues, community events. So this is one that you might, I wouldn't say that any website that's not staffed by DPI, presents information that is wholly consistent with DPI, but this is a really great one that I think you can get a lot of ideas, and this is also excellent because you can access information in English or in Spanish. So let's see. One of the first websites that really focused on learners who have learning disabilities is LD Online, and it was an award-winning website. Now, while it's loading here, it's loading twice. One of the things that I really like about this is that there are different sections here that are for students. And I thought it was right here, but it's not. So there are sections of it that students might want to access. Students can participate by sharing their stories and their art. And I've had some of my students participate. So it really does include a lifespan approach to students with learning disabilities in terms of information. And there's a lot of information here that's practical. There are also some research-based sorts of articles that can be read. Well, sorry, this is a little clunkier than I thought. Read On Wisconsin is one of my favorites. And this is a site that's run by the Cooperative Children's Book Center, which is a non-circulating library at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. But the Cooperative Children's Book Center has partnered with a number of organizations, including the Department of Public Instruction. And every month they will have a topic and then different titles that they've selected to suggest to you. And you can see it's according to different grades, so that you can select materials that might be useful at home or in your classroom. You can check the titles out and go to your local library. There are also additional resources that are included. So I love reading, and I think some of you do too, based on your questions. and that's a really wonderful site for parents and for teachers. I'm going to go back here. I don't know why. All right, I'm going to go back then a different way. If you hang on, just wanted to show you. All right, went in a different way. The site should get you there, but this is the specific learning disabilities page at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction website. And there's some introductory information, but then you can see down here are a number of categories of information that we referred to today. So I referred to some forms, and you can find those here. Guidance for implementing the frequently asked questions document is going to have good information for you if you're looking at information about the SLD eligibility process. Licensing information, and here's the document that I was talking about. Licensing requirements for providing students with interventions is right there. It tells you what is needed. And supplemental guidance resources. Here is where you'll find the dyslexia document. SLD in plain language is a nice resource that boils down the requirements to 2 pages. So while this DPI page looks pretty formidable in terms of navigating from one place to another, there's a lot of information there, and if you kind of click on individual links, you can get some information. If you get stuck in terms of being able to find information, again, I would say please contact me, and we'll do our best to get that sorted out for you. So those were the primary resources that I wanted to kind of point out for you. These are really excellent resources in terms of busting myths, especially the top 3 can provide information about specific learning disabilities. Any questions?
I do have one additional one, and it's asking, do you collaborate with WIBITA? And for those, maybe we should explain what WIBITA is.
Okay, and I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for.
I think it's the Wisconsin, well, the person who asked the question, if you can spell it all out, but it is the Association for Reading Disabilities, I believe, in our state.
Yeah. Part of my hesitation is that's one of the things we do here at DPI a lot is we really focus a lot on acronyms, and I don't always break them down as well as I should. But WIBITA is one reading organization. The Wisconsin
it's the Wisconsin. Yeah, sorry, it's the Wisconsin branch of International Dyslexia Association, branches in Madison, Milwaukee, and Eau Claire.
There you go. Thank you very much for providing that information. So, yeah, there's WIBITA, there's the Reading Coalition in Wisconsin, there's the Wisconsin State WSRA Reading Association. So at DPI, what we try to do is collaborate with all of the professional organizations. So I do have conversations with folks from WIBITA and from other organizations. I also I do offer a listserv for professionals in schools who work with students with SLD. But, you know, even as I'm saying that, I mean, it's really open to anybody. So if anybody wanted to be on that listserv, they could just let me know. There's SLD, Wisconsin SLD has a Twitter account. And the reason I bring that up in the context of WIBDA is whenever I hear about different learning experiences that professional groups have, whether it's the Wisconsin Council for Exceptional Children or Facets or anybody, you know, I try and spread the word about that information. So that's one way that we collaborate with other organizations.
I do have one other question for you, Deb. Can a school psych evaluation be used to guide intervention selection and identify student learning needs?
That's a really, I would say yes, because all the information that's brought to the IEP team is used to help determine what is the area of concern. You know, when you're at that point of review of existing data, you're going to consider all the information that you have, including a school psychology evaluation. You would not conduct an assessment like in the context of the SLD rule. The interventions are implemented, and then a classroom achievement test is administered. So you wouldn't flip the order and have the school psych administer, you know, like a classroom achievement test, and then decide if the student was going to if that was going to be the area of concern. Does that make any sense? In other words, you would consider those data from the school psychologist at the time of the review of existing data like you would all other information. I'm not sure that's answering the question. Do they want to provide any more detail, Bonnie?
I can ask the questioner to provide any additional detail, or if you believe that answers your question.
Okay. And
then maybe if you have some parting summing words for everybody.
Okay. I've been promising you throughout. Here is how you can contact me. Email is great. Phone is great. Whatever works best for you. As I said, there have been a couple times during our time together this afternoon where I've asked you to get in touch with me if you would like additional information. You can always, in other contexts as well, reach out to me either by phone or email, and I'll do my utmost to get back to you in a timely manner. So.
Thank you very much, Deb. There is no follow-up to that question, so I think you probably have answered it for the person who asked it.
Okay. If not, maybe they can be in touch with me also. And again, I want to thank everybody for being present today, because our lives are all so busy, and I really appreciate not only your attention but your interest. Wisconsin's SLD rule is, as I said, it's rolling along. I think that a lot of us have learned a lot of information within the past couple of years, and I think that we'll continue to learn together. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Deb. I'm sure that everybody in attendance today definitely appreciated your presentation and learned lots from it. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all for joining us. Wisconsin Facets has over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars for the rest of this year and into next year. Please check our website and register for upcoming trainings. And please watch for the short evaluation coming your way after the webinar is completed. Have a great day. And again, thank you, Deb, for your most informative presentation today. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it, Deb.
Oh, well,